Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact the show at twitter.com/DW Groovecast and through Facebook at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a monkey. Ain't a monkey. Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Well, we get straightened out?
No, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Next!
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah!
Hey there, Groovecasters. Phil here from the show. As always, thanks for tuning in and listening. John and I just appreciate you guys to no end. We appreciate your emails and your Facebook messages, Twitter messages, and so on. If you read the description today, you know that this is a special day. It's interview day. We don't do them very often at all. And when we do, we want them to be special. And this one is not going to disappoint. Trust me on that. It's the perfect time to go ahead and segue into a nice, warm, hearty welcome to the legion of Zappa fanatics that are out there. We know that there are thousands upon thousands of you going to be listening to this, and we don't want to disappoint you either. So, onward, let's talk about our guest for the day. I had the opportunity to interview the wonderful Ryan Brown, drummer for the Dweezil Zappa band. He came to us as a friend of a friend, as almost everybody in the music business is. We're only one or two phone calls away. And I reached out to him a little over a week ago, and he was thrilled to be a part of the show. And as you will soon find out, I was thrilled that he was a part of the show. The interview went so well, and the answers were so wonderfully thought out that we let this thing run, and run it did indeed. We are doing a two-part show over the next couple of weeks. And let me tell you, don't skip over any of it. There's not a bit of fluff involved in either show. When Ryan and I first talked, we discussed that we were not going to spend a lot of time on like early life biographical style things. Instead, we were going to start right with drumming, spend just a little bit of time on his early drumming, and then go straight into his higher learning, and then his eventual move to Los Angeles, trying to establish himself as a professional working musician in that city. And then we talk about nuts and bolts. We talk about things like the cost of living in Los Angeles, practicalities of like where to live, where to practice, different gigs that you take to make ends meet. And he was candid and informative every step of the way. So do not skip any of this stuff. It is wonderful, wonderful information. And for the Zappa fans out there, you are certainly not going to be disappointed. Ryan goes into very detailed explanations about how he discovered the music, which led to him learning Zappa's music at an early age, and then eventually playing some of Zappa's music during his recitals when he was at the University of Indiana. Afterwards, he's going to tell you how he learned about this dream gig, how he got initial phone calls from Dweezil himself, and then how the audition process went to the point of getting the gig, negotiating money, the rehearsals, and then even what a normal Zappa gig day is like. It is good, good stuff, folks. So I'm not going to keep you in suspense and belabor the points any longer. Let's take a few seconds of Frank Zappa's initial musical inspiration, Edgar Varèse's Ionization, to bridge our way into the interview with Ryan Brown. See you on the other side. Happy Monday, everybody. It's Phil here from the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. And once again, the Groovecast mobile recording truck has hit the road. And we are down in Little 5 Points, Atlanta at the Variety Playhouse. We have a very, very, very special guest today. He's the drummer with the Dweezil Zappa band. We have Ryan Brown on the show today. Say hello to the folks, Ryan.
Hello, everybody. How's it going? Phil, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Man, absolutely my pleasure. This is a great time to tell all the folks out there that Ryan is one of these folks that I've never met before, except I met him about 15 minutes ago. And to kind of illustrate the very small grapevine that is our music business, he was literally one phone call away. You've heard us talk about this before on the show, is that, one of the things about being in the music business, you need to be a good guy. You need to be a nice person because everybody knows everybody else, So I was able to give Ryan a call, knew he was coming through Atlanta, and he was very gracious to get back to me in a hurry. And so we went ahead and set this thing up today, and we got a lot we're going to talk about on the show. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Ryan, we know you're from Denver originally when you grew up. So just give us a little quick background on how you got started playing as a kid.
So the first drum set I got was when I was 3 years old for Christmas, a little Sears drum set. But the first drum that I got, and this is one of my mom's favorite stories, was from her brother when I think I was 6 months old. And he bought me a drum just to piss off my mom.
What's the old Chinese proverb, buy thine enemy's son a drum or something like that? I think I just butchered that, but yeah. No,
exactly.
That's good, man.
Yeah. He was thinking, I'll buy Ryan a drum and he'll start playing drums and he'll really get under my sister's skin. And well, look what happened. But, I didn't, it was just, a toy drum and I was a little kid and I got my first drum set when I was 3.
Yeah.
When I was 3 and 4, I would play. And my mom is a great piano player, and she plays all kinds of music. And I would play drums on the little Sears drum set while she would play rags on the piano. And
cool.
So that was my first experience of playing with anybody. Was doing that when I was 3 and 4 years old.
Wow. So how long you had the drum set when you were 3? Mm-hmm. How long did you go before all of a sudden you were like thinking, I've gone as far as I can go with this little set. Maybe I need to look into some kind of instruction.
That's a great question. So I did that when I was 3 and 4, and then that was kind of the end of it. When I was 4, it was a fun little toy that was around the house. I had a blast doing it. My mom and I would play together all the time, and then I broke the heads, and they were paper heads.
I have a similar story, yeah.
And you can't replace them, right?
Yeah.
So you break the heads, and it's over, and that was it. It was over. So when I was 6 years old, my mom had me start taking piano lessons.
Cool.
So that was it for drums for me. It was just a fun little thing that I did with my mom. We played together. It was awesome, and then I switched to piano, and she had me start taking lessons. So I played piano from the time I was 6 until 12.
Okay.
And in 4th grade, so when I was 9, I started playing trumpet, and I got braces. And when I got the braces, and I was warned about this, they said, you've got to get the wax and put the wax in your braces or you're going to kill your lips. And I, started bleeding all the time, and I just could not take it anymore. And I was like, I am done with trumpet. I have to quit this. Meanwhile, still playing piano at the same time.
Uh-huh.
So I went into school band in 6th grade.
Right.
When I was 11, and I said, you know what? I can't do the trumpet anymore with the braces. It's just killing me. And my band director, Lois Ladnick, said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. I want to still play. I just don't know what I want to play. And so she got down all the instruments after band that day. She got down everything, and I started playing everything. I got to snare drum. I said to her, you know what? I like this a lot. I'll do snare drum. And so that's when it really started. So that was when I was 11. But I had this kind of prior experience, if you want to call it that, from when I was super young, playing with my mom. But
very, very cool, man. Quick question about then when you were in band, because I know this is the way that it is in the Atlanta area with kids who want to play drums or percussion in band, is that there's a lot of times a prerequisite, okay, of having drum lessons, and sometimes even a recommendation from a drum teacher, because quite honestly, and we're hip to it because we know playing drums are cool, but everybody wants to play drums in band. So when you were introduced to snare drum, with your background in piano, was that also kind of the light bulb moment for the band director, you think, to go, this kid can play keyboards also. He can play orchestra bells. He can play marimba, that kind of stuff. He's going to be my guy that does that.
I think that it was.
Yeah.
And she knew that I could already read music because
yeah.
I've been reading since I was 6, and I'd been playing trumpet. And she got out a book of, rhythms. It was one of those like Haskell W. Haar books.
Right.
And I started going through that. I vividly remember that day. She pulled the snare drum down. I remember the shelf it was on. She pulled it down and put one of those books up in front of me and just started playing, quarter note, eighth note patterns. So I think that probably was a thing for her, that she knew I could already read. So she'd have somebody in the drum section that would at least know how to play partially what was written.
The good band directors have ulterior motives, right? Yeah. So you did that for a while, and then I'm sure there had to then be a moment of like, okay, I'm in band and I already know how to read, but yet there are, of course, specific skills, technique-wise, and even just instrument-wise, that you probably had a realization of like, I need to find somebody that can help me with actual drums. So tell us about that then, like some of your first dedicated drum teachers.
Yeah, definitely. So I started playing in the band. And she actually, Miss Ladnick, she said, you know what, you need to get a teacher if you want to do this. And I'd always been very serious about all this stuff, since I was 6. My mom had me in piano lessons, and I was taking trumpet lessons and doing all that. So I was already used to taking lessons for various instruments. So there's a guy named John Bartman, who is a amazing trumpet player. And plays in the Queen City Jazz Band in Denver, and plays in all kinds of amazing jazz gigs. And he said, you know what, I'll teach you how to play drums. So he's actually a trumpet player.
Okay.
But he was my first guy that said, hey, I'll teach you how to read snare drum stuff and rolls and everything like that. And I believe he had, I don't know this for sure, I believe he had an education degree, and so had a background in teaching the basics on every instrument.
So this guy taught you rudiments then?
Yeah, he right out of the gate, even though he was a trumpet player.
Interesting.
And we had a great mutual friend who, ironically, was my neighbor across the street, who was not a musician, but it was a diehard jazz fan, and would go out and see all the Dixieland bands around Denver all the time. And so he would see John Bartman. So we figured out immediately that he knew my neighbor across the street. And so I would go see him do these gigs, and he would teach me rudiments. But it was all no drum set. It was all snare drum, just only snare drum stuff.
Interesting. So I guess his whole thing was then he was teaching you rudiments. Did he teach you like the traditional way of doing rudiments from slow to fast to slow, that type? Did he use any other methods though, like say, Wilcoxon books or Goldenberg or any of that type thing?
No, he didn't. I don't know if he really knew about that stuff. It was more like the Haskell W. Hart, stick control.
Oh yeah,
was one of them, kind of like the go-to kind of starting books.
Yeah,
and with a metronome right out of the gate. Have to practice to a metronome, slow to fast. All the rudiments. I can't remember. Every year they add some. At that point, there were 24 or whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So then you did that for a while. Now, somewhere along the line, there had to be this kind of moment where you were like, drum set. I want to play full kit. Like, snare drum's cool.
Yeah.
When did drum set come into the picture then?
So that was in 6th grade, and then
Okay.
I started middle school in 7th grade. 6th grade was part of elementary school. And he had told me, he said, well, there's a jazz band. When you get to 7th grade, there's a jazz band, so you could start playing drum set and do that. And I said, I would love to do that. So I didn't even get a drum set or start playing drum set until June, the summer before my 7th grade year. And I got the drum set June 25th. I remember the day.
Oh man,
The first day I got that kit.
Yeah.
A 1965 Slingerland kit that I would kill to have back that I don't have anymore.
That was the next question I was going to say. Please tell me you have that. You know,
I wish.
Yeah.
But since then, I've saved pretty much everything that I have. But that one thing, I wish I had that back. So when I started doing drum set, then John Bartman said, you know what, I'm not your drum set guy. So there was a music store in our neighborhood called DJ's Music Box. And there was a drum teacher there. We just went there. My mom asked them, and there was a guy named Dave Robnett.
yeah.
And Dave Robnett was amazing. And I started taking lessons from him that summer before my 7th grade year, all the way up through till when I graduated from high school. He was my guy.
Wow. What did he show you? What did he teach you?
So the first thing I remember was him exposing me to other styles of music, namely fusion.
Yeah.
Because I did not know anything about that. So just so you know, I'm an only child.
Okay.
So I have a lot of friends who had older siblings feeding them music. So I didn't
that
have
was
that.
me.
That was
Yeah.
okay, awesome. Right.
Yeah, my brother's 13 years older than me, and that's one of the main ways I got started was going through his record collection.
Yeah, see, that's awesome. Yeah, and I have a lot of friends in the same boat. So I'm an only child.
Yeah.
My mom listened to orchestral music all the time and piano music because she played piano. And my dad loves Motown and R&B.
Yeah.
There was basically no rock music, no Beatles, nothing. There was none of that. So Dave Robnett was the guy that was kind of like, okay, here's this other stuff. Now, even though there was no rock music like in the house, at the time, my favorite bands were like the Beach Boys and number one, Huey Lewis and the News.
Bill Gibson. Okay.
Bill Gibson. Yeah. It's all about Bill Gibson.
I'm going to try to get you starstruck. Okay. I've opened up for Huey Lewis and the News.
Are you serious? Are you serious? Can I shake your hand?
Totally
serious. Can I shake your hand?
Absolutely. There's a handshake going on right now, guys. Yeah. Bill Gibson.
I love it.
Yeah. Great player. He really is a great pop and rock player. Yeah.
Super solid.
Yeah.
And I look back on it now, and you know that was the first thing I ever played along with. The first tape I ever played was sports. It was Huey Lewis and the News sports, and then
Awesome.
all the Picture This and all the other Huey Lewis stuff. But it was that, and I remember I had a subscription to the Columbia House cassette tape club, and that's how I started to get music, which ended up being, I remember, the Cars and Prince, and I don't even know how I picked this stuff. It's probably because the stamps, and you would lick the stamps and put them on the sheet to send in. I just started getting stuff, but it was not, it was all pop music. It was good pop music, but nothing crazy. So Dave Robnett was, I remember day one, he was like, okay, so there's this guy named Steve Gadd, and there's this guy named Dave Weckl, and there's this band called the Chick Corea Electric Band, and here you go, we'll see you next week. And I went home and was like, oh, wow.
Yeah. One thing that I think is very interesting and something that I've brought up, it's been a little bit of a soapbox topic for me on this show, and you are illustrating my point perfectly on this, and you had no idea that this was going to go in this direction. But something that I talk about all the time is that, in my opinion, most students today don't seem to have that spirit of of adventure and that kind of spirit of wanting to investigate the music and investigate different types of music to kind of inspire them to learn how to play and to learn from the masters, to learn from these guys. A lot of times they're so kind of like lick oriented, or there's this very specific kind of thing that I want to do, and then everything else is kind of shut out. And I just wanted to bring that to the listeners' attention. Is here we have another example of a wonderful professional player that really dug down into the music and went outside of just, hey, I'm just going to do my lesson, I'm just going to do my stick control, I'm just going to do this, that, or the other, where you actually did a little bit of drumming, anthropology, so to speak. You dug into some stuff. So that whole thing, that lack of curiosity is one of the biggest problems I have with students today.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. So I also teach, and I see, not everybody obviously, but there's a lot of guys that are unbelievable at, one style of music, and outside of that one thing, they don't know even how to play like a basic groove of anything else. And that actually parlays well into my experience with Dave Robneck, because right out of the gate, so he went to the University of Colorado in Boulder and got a degree and got a master's degree and was an amazing percussionist, mallet percussionist, and amazing piano player. Day one with me, he was like, okay, you're going to learn how to play every single style of music. And he had a book that he wrote. Excuse me. He had a book that he wrote. And he said, okay, here's these Latin beats, bossa nova, samba. Here's all this fusion stuff. And I didn't heard of any of it before.
Right.
I didn't know, I was like, did Bill Gibson play that? And he said no. And I was like, well, then I don't know it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that, I knew jazz from being in starting in jazz band. But that was his whole thing. And fast forward now, that to me is how you make a living. As if you can play all styles of music. I talk to students about this all the time. But for me, it goes back to literally day one with somebody just feeding that and to me and saying, you need to learn how to do this. You have to do this. Because for me, if you can be a phenomenal rock drummer and get amazing rock gigs, but you won't get any of the other gigs. But if you can learn all styles of music, you'll work forever.
Yeah.
Forever.
You really don't want to have to pick up the phone and turn down gigs in this business. You
Bingo.
Really don't, So that's a great point. Now, when you were studying with Dave, did he ever take you through some of like what we'll call like the standard books, like, let's say the Chapin book or syncopation or of course stick control, that kind of thing?
He did all of those. His kind of go-to that became my favorite is that Joe Morello book, Master Studies. That to me is my book for all that. But he did all of that. He exposed me to everything. It was like you mentioned Will Coxon earlier, like the Will Coxon book, Chapin, the Morello. The other huge one for him, which is one of my favorites to teach out of now, is the Rick Latham Advanced Funk Studies book.
Great book.
Which I love to, even guys that come to me that love only playing metal, love that book, because you can take that book, you can take those grooves and put it in any style of music.
Right.
So he really opened my eyes going through pretty much all the classic books, and and eventually the New Breed. As I got into high school, those are kind of the ones I still go back to.
I tell my students that, and I've actually done a show on this also, that if you are a serious student and you seek out a serious teacher to help you get to whatever your goal is, whether it's, of course, to be a professional player or to get into college or any kind of institute of higher learning, there's a series of books that if this teacher is not familiar with them, you need to leave a silhouette in the door, man, and get out of there. Because I say, look, a good qualified teacher, I don't care if he's teaching in LA, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, London, or Tokyo, there are certain books that you need to know and be aware of. And it's for numerous reasons. I mean, of course, it's for the actual knowledge that you get out of those books and that you can apply. But I mean, especially if you're going to play on a higher level, it's very important to be able, just like we're doing here, to converse about these and know these books, know the New Breed, know Master Study, stick control, syncopation, know all those different systems inside of syncopation, Chapin book, Will Coxon, all those things. They are just vitally important to know. So it is incredibly wonderful and refreshing to hear you say that. It really is.
Well, that's great. And I agree with you, 100%. It's anything I've found, I'm sure you have too, anything you practice can be used in any other style of music, any situation, anything that comes up.
Yep, absolutely.
Like it all translates to everything else. So why not learn it? Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Ryan, somewhere down the road, sometime I suppose it was in high school, you you had a moment where you thought, this is what I'm going to do.
Yep.
This is going to be it. And just tell the listeners a little bit kind of how you had that day of reckoning, so to speak. And that's going to kind of naturally lead us into, you went to school for this, you went to college. So
Yeah. So there were 2 days for me.
Okay.
There were two that I will never forget. So the first was, I get into jazz band in middle school in 7th grade. About halfway through 7th grade year, I think it was in January, early January. The other drummer, who was 1 year ahead of me, and his name was Rich Lida. I have no idea. I haven't talked to him for 30 years. I should try to find him.
Yeah.
I remember he came to school one day. He said, "Hey, there's a drum clinic at this store," and it was a store in Denver called Pro Sound. There was another store called Rupp's Drums, which I bought almost everything at, and these two stores had tons of drum clinics. And going to drum clinics for me was a massive thing. But this first day, I had no idea what it was.
Right.
And he said, "Hey, there's this drum clinic. My dad's going to take me. Do you want to go?" And I was like, "What's a drum clinic?" So he explained it to me, and it was Greg Bissonette. I had no idea who Greg Bissonette was. I didn't know anything about anything, right? So we go. I talked to my parents. My parents were like, "Yeah, sure, of course, go." So I go to this clinic, and watching Bissonette, and it was on the Skyscraper tour, the David Lee Roth Skyscraper record.
Right.
And he was playing along with a bunch of songs and did solos, and I'd never seen that, and there was no YouTube. You didn't have any exposure to any of this stuff. I hadn't seen, I think I'd seen 2 concerts, literally. It was the Beach Boys and Huey Lewis, like I mentioned them earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of that clinic, I remember watching him and just saying, "That's it, game over. I want to be that guy. I
Interesting.
want to be this guy. This is the greatest thing ever." And so the next day, my mom and I went to the mall, the South Glen Mall, and went to Taco Bell for lunch, and then went to Music Land, and I bought Skyscraper on cassette tape. And for me that record, that was it. I was too young to know Eat 'Em and Smile yet. The first one, so I got in on Skyscraper, and it was over. It's all Greg Bissonette. That was, I want to say that was in January of '88, something like that.
Right. It is amazing to me that I've asked several people, not just on the podcast, but I've asked several friends similar questions before about, when did it become obvious to you? Everybody remembers, and everybody remembers in that kind of a detail. I went to Taco Bell. I had a chalupa. But it is unequivocal. Everybody remembers that. That is such an important part of our lives.
Yeah, it's like I remember I remember the whole day. I remember what the sun looked like coming through the window in my parents' house.
Yeah,
I remember putting it on the boombox and listening to it and just being just like, "Oh my gosh!" Like I've never heard anything like this before. I'd never heard hard rock music.
Right.
So that was the first day. So that was the kind of like I want to be this guy, but I was still young enough to where it wasn't like a life commitment,
right?
For like being a profession.
Yeah.
It was I'm gonna play drums. I want to be that guy, but still, maybe uncertain on the profession side of it. So the next day, the second day for me, June 22nd, 1990.
Incredible.
And one of my best friends that lived around the corner, Chris Childress, guitar player, friend of mine, he had said, "Hey, do you know this band called Rush?" I did not know this band. And he said, "Yeah, well, the drummer's amazing. He takes these huge drum solos, and Chris is a year older than me. And he'd been listening to them for a while. I didn't know anything about him. Now, this was very fortuitous, but I grew up right next to a venue called Fiddler's Green, it's like an outdoor shed venue. Right. I don't know what the equivalent, maybe there's like a Verizon Wireless here.
Yeah,
or something.
There actually is a Verizon Wireless amphitheater. There's a Hi-Fi Buys amphitheater, and then there's a Chastain Park. All of them are the shed type.
So that like that
sure.
style. I grew up 1 mile away from this place. And so it was right after I turned 14. And Rush was there on the Presto tour, and he said, "Hey, we gotta go. So we convinced our parents to let us walk over by ourselves when we were 14, he was 15 to go to the Rush show, and watching that show, that was it, game over. I was watching them play and I was like, all right, I'm doing this for the rest of my life.
Incredible. One thing about Neil Peart is that he is the proverbial lightning rod, for a lot of, for good and bad. But I'll tell you, there's one thing that is undeniable about this guy, is that he is instrumental in sparking career after career after career and interest in drumming.
Yeah.
I mean, that is absolutely undeniable. Even his harshest critics, cannot deny that. Because he was instrumental for me as well. Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah.
So that's fantastic. So now this happened to you. All right. So there had to be the time where you're like, okay, now I'm going to go to a school of higher learning. I'm going to go to some kind of music school. Describe your thought process on that, of like when you decided you were going to do this, and then what were some of the schools that you looked at?
Yeah. So the first thing, and I think one of the biggest things for all of us, is parental support. So the first thing for me was, talk to my parents about it. Is it okay if I do this, instead of, going to be an engineer or an attorney or, whatever somebody else may want you to do versus what you really want to do. And so right out of the gate, my parents were like, yes, that's great,
awesome,
but we want you to have a backup plan. So maybe you could get a double major, get a minor in something else. I was like, that's fantastic. Whatever. I know I want to do this. So I wanted to go somewhere where they had an amazing music school, amazing jazz department and orchestral department, and a professional drummer teaching there. Mm-hmm. And that immediately led me to two places, which is Indiana, where I ended up going. And Kenny Aronoff was the drum set teacher there. Uh-huh. David Baker was the head of the jazz department, and it's a great music school. It's a great orchestral school. Northwestern was another one. Paul Wertico was the drum set teacher there, who I met 2 weeks ago for the first time. I told him this story. I just told him. Paul Wertico, who at the time was playing with Pat Metheny, was there, and that was a great school. And I looked at University of Michigan. Michael Udow was there teaching orchestral percussion. I looked at University of Miami and some other places. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to go to a major university, and that was primarily, again, kind of going back to my parents and having a backup plan in case I didn't want to do it. Then there would be another avenue to pursue. So in case I decided not to do music, I could stay at the same place and get an engineering degree or whatever, whatever it is.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of why I was focusing on large size schools that have lots of things to offer. Right. And then I did an audition tour and ended up going to Indiana, Northwestern, and Ohio State.
Okay.
And Michigan. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those four in the Midwest. Did that, and Dave Rubnett helped me, the whole time, going through all those books and my audition pieces. There's a bunch of orchestral stuff, but the Dave Weckl stuff from Contemporary Drummer Plus One.
Oh yeah.
Garden Wall.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Now that you mentioned the cat's out of the bag on the audition tour, it's fascinating to me to have you describe the different auditions, because I know what I did when I auditioned at the schools that I went to. Tell me, kind of just in a nutshell, at these different places that you went, obviously you auditioned with Garden Wall, I guess is what it was, but what were some of the other requirements that they had, and like roughly how long did you have, like, people looking over your shoulder? Was there a panel of people that were looking at you? Just a rough idea.
Yeah, so at Indiana there was a panel. At Michigan, it was just for UDOW, and there was a panel at the other two schools too. I think it was 3 people at each of the schools that had the panel, and I had to do a piece on pretty much every instrument. I had to do a snare drum etude. Mm-hmm. I did some Anthony Cerrone. Yeah.
Portraits in Rhythm.
From Portraits in Rhythm. I can't remember which one. Yeah. I should be able to remember that. I could probably play it, but I don't remember what number it was. There was a timpani piece There was a 2-mallet piece. There was a 4-mallet piece.
Cool.
There was the drum set piece, and then there was playing all styles of music.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't just I did Garden Wall. I think I did Island Magic also from the Weckl, from the Contemporary.
That was in
Drummer
7,
Plus.
isn't
Yeah,
it?
it was the one in 7. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was great. And then all styles of music. So I had to be ready to go for everything on drum set. Pretty much anything that you would be asked to do in playing percussion or drum set.
Right.
For all of those schools, even though I wanted to be a jazz major.
Right.
And I still, I wasn't totally sure, but and I ended up doing a ton of orchestral stuff in Indiana. Mm-hmm. But I had to be ready for everything.
Certainly.
So,
yeah. Well, that's interesting, man. When you auditioned at these different schools, did you, after you auditioned, did you go ahead? I'm not sure if you actually applied to those schools beforehand or if you just went and auditioned and applied afterward. But what I'm getting at is, did you get accepted to all of them? Were there some that you didn't get accepted to?
I got accepted to all of them except Northwestern, and that was because of an academic thing. Because it's an amazing academic school. My GPA in high school was like a 3.4, and 3.4 wasn't good enough to get into Northwestern. But I got into all the rest of them. But when I went on the audition tour, I knew immediately when I went to Indiana, there was something about the campus, there was something about the feel of the place, not even counting meeting anybody there yet, that when I stepped foot on the campus and then started meeting the people, I immediately knew. I was like, this is where I want to go. This place is great. And then I met, Wilbur England and Jerry Carlos and the guys in the percussion department, and David Baker and Dominic Spera, who was a trumpet player there. And I knew, my parents knew. We were like, that's it, Indiana.
So we're packing up. We're going across country. We're going from Denver to Bloomington, right?
Yeah.
So you get there, okay, and you're getting settled into school and whatnot. Let me just ask you this right up off the bat. Were you a fellow that liked classes? Because, it's funny. A lot of times you can kind of separate people right down the middle. It's like, I'm here to play. And then there's other people that are like, hey, man, I dig theory and ear training and orchestration and all this other stuff. Well, how did you feel about your class work?
You're right about that drawing a line thing.
Yeah.
I loved it. Mm-hmm. I loved it. And I think for me, it went back to playing piano from the time I was 6 on. So I'd always had a theory background. I was always interested in that. And I grew up around orchestral music all the time, with my mom listening to orchestral music. So I love those classes. I love the history of music classes, and I love history classes in general, just seeing, where, whatever art form starts at and how it gets to the next place. Right. And how painting will affect music, will affect whatever, and how, everything is, affecting each other. And
certainly.
I loved it. So
now with going into a large school of music like this, that, obviously there is an orchestral side and then there is the drum set / jazz side of things. Something that I want to bring across to the listeners that may not be aware of this, of how this actually works, because I think there could be a lot of kids out there that think that you just roll right in and all you do is play drum set, right? And not realize that you do have your drum set lessons, but you do have the orchestral side where for the most part, for me, when in my undergraduate studies, the first couple years were significantly more toward the orchestral side, like keyboard, timpani, that type thing. So when you first got there, how was that? Did you roll immediately into taking lessons with Aronoff, or did you do some other things prior to and then kind of work your way into it?
That's a great question. So studying with Kenny, there was a list. There was a wait list to get in with him. Mm-hmm. So I had to wait for a few quarters, but I started taking lessons with him on the side, like paying him to take outside of school lessons.
Yeah.
So I met him right away, but had to wait. But tons of orchestral stuff. So even though I was a jazz major, I had to do all of the same requirements as a person who was getting an orchestral percussion degree, all of them, plus all the jazz classes. So it was tons of orchestral stuff at first, and all the classes were theory classes and history of Western music, classes in medieval music and chant, You know,
Do you remember your Goethe?
yeah, yeah. San Martini and all these
right.
guys. Yeah. So, you know, it was all about that. There was jazz stuff with David Baker and Dominic Sparrow too, but not a lot right in the beginning. So you know, at the beginning, it was more just a history of music per se, which I'm very grateful for, just to see just how, you know, from the history of time, just how everything got to where it did today.
Right. So some of like the let's talk real quickly about some of the things that your orchestral studies involved. Did you do a little bit of everything from the standpoint? Did you do keyboard, percussion, timpani, orchestral snare drum, accessories? Were there particular methods that these teachers had you go through, like the Cerrone or?
Like, yeah, lots of Cerrone, and then we all had to play in numerous ensembles. So there was like concert band, orchestra, opera.
Interesting. I
and
avoided that one. Yeah.
The only thing I've never done is marching band. That's the
Same
only thing.
here.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there's not a lot of us.
Yeah.
'Cause, yeah, I know in high school, after I graduated high school, you had to do marching band to be in jazz band or anything else. But yeah, it's interesting. That's the only thing I never did. But you know, tons of focus on and like the Fink snare drum etudes. And, you know, all kinds of solo timpani pieces and, you know, solo vibe pieces. And then that ended up going into jazz vibes.
Yeah.
You know, playing, I remember like Desafinata was one of the first tunes I ever played on vibes.
Cool.
But my piano background helped a lot with that. But there were definitely, you know, specific methods. You know, Indiana's a very hardcore orchestral school. So,
Right.
So, you know, it was, you know, super technique based.
Right.
And
so after doing this for a while, eventually, and I know you had studied privately with Aronoff, somewhere along the line, it kind of worked yourself into where you were in school studying with Aronoff as well. What were the methods and the different styles that he had you work on? I know that he was a student of Gary Chester, so he knew the new breed. I'm sure that was part of it. Go ahead and let us know what you studied with Aronoff.
yeah, so new breed for sure. The syncopation book, and you mentioned this earlier, taking the syncopation book, the exercises 1 through 9, pages 37 on, and doing the Alan Dawson thing, which is very new breed-ish.
Right.
So tons of that, coordination exercises, lots of coordination exercises, you know, like the new breed. And for those of you that don't know, like playing an ostinato with one limb, you know, or 3 limbs, then reading a line with another limb, separating all of your limbs out. A lot of that stuff, playing all styles, making sure everything was cool in the jazz ensembles, reading, and then the biggest thing was charting songs, learning songs, and transcribing songs.
Love it.
And that was
So
massive.
important.
And I got into that with Dave Robnett when I was in high school. And I remember that the first thing that he ever had me transcribe was a Weckel, like Chick Corea Electric Band song. It was one of the hardest things, you know, when you're 14 and you have to learn how to transcribe, and he throws this in front of you. And I remember it took me, you know, like a week to get 2 bars down.
Yeah.
But I got the 2 bars.
Yeah.
It took forever. But Kenny's whole thing was, you know, you learn this like it's an audition. So you know, a lot of stuff we would do was stuff he had played on. You know, not everything. You know, other stuff we would bring in. But we would pick you know, like a John Mellencamp song or something. He'd say, you know, learn this exactly how I played it. Chart this out, and then it was kind of like in a sense, like a mock audition.
Right.
Like he was preparing us in an amazing way for the real world, which is you get a call. And, you know, somebody could say, hey, you know, tomorrow there's this audition. Can you learn these 5 songs by tomorrow? You know, by tomorrow at 2:00, and you that's how you get work.
Right.
So it was just him like getting us ready to do that.
That's so he really, along with all the different methods, he instilled the importance of gig preparation. In other words, how important that is. That is awesome. That's fantastic.
It was amazing. And, you know, when you're studying with him and you're that age, you don't see it from the inside that way right away. But then we would watch him do it, and that's when I started to really understand. So he got the Smashing Pumpkins gig while I was studying with him, and I was hanging out with him, watching him learn Smashing Pumpkins songs and chart them out, and he had to learn like something like 200 songs. So then it's like, okay, all this stuff that he's having us do, this is real.
Right.
It's this is what happens, because look, he's doing it right now for the Smashing Pumpkins, and I want to do that.
Right.
So now I'm going to transcribe as much stuff as I possibly can.
Awesome. So now, with taking lessons from a high-profile working drummer, what happened when he would go on the road or when he was on gigs?
So that's the $1 million question, and that ultimately led to him not teaching at Indiana anymore. And he went to Indiana,
Right.
and at the time he lived in Bloomington. He got an orchestral degree there, and not a lot of people know that, but he was an amazing
Timpanist,
percussionist,
right?
timpanist,
Yeah.
and mallet player, and he was on the road with Melissa Etheridge, Joe Cocker. When I was with him, it was kind of the post Mellencamp days, and he would be gone for long stretches of time. And then he would come back in town, a month later, and then we'd have 4 lessons in a week, and then he'd be gone for 3 weeks, and then we'd have 3 lessons in a week, and we loved it. I mean, because we're studying from this guy who's doing exactly what we wanted to do. There were about 10 of us or so that were studying with him at the time, and we had no problem with it. But the university did ultimately, and I understand that. I mean, I totally get it. We didn't want it to end, but ultimately it did. That did end. But then I kept taking lessons from him outside of school. But he was no longer, quote, Professor Aronoff.
Right. So that happened
anymore.
You're saying that happened while you were in school?
That happened while I was there.
I gotcha.
That did.
I
Yeah.
gotcha.
So yeah, when I started, I was on a wait list. I eventually got in with him. Then eventually he was on the road so much that it just didn't really work for the university for him to be there.
Right.
Which, makes sense from an academic standpoint. I get it, but it ended up working out for me because then I was taking lessons from him on the side, and then also having another teacher, doing orchestral stuff in school. So
Right. Yeah. Did they replace him with another drum set centered teacher there?
They did,
Yeah.
and then that eventually became Steve Houghton after a couple of years.
Is he up there now?
He's there now. Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and that happened after I got there. There were a couple of interim guys that were there until they found like the permanent guy, and now
Right.
it's Steve Houghton. He's been there for like a long time. I want to say like maybe 10 years,
Right.
or 12 years. Like it's been a while now. Yeah.
I was not aware. I learned something today.
Yes.
Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah. So now, one of the things that I tell students when they are contemplating going to school, well, actually, a couple things. I'll kind of wrap this up about school with a couple things. I always tell them, I always say, look, one of the more valuable things that you will do when you go to school is you're going to socialize and be around people that are of like mind, and hopefully you will work with probably the rest of your life. I know that man, I was in undergraduate school 26 years ago, and I still work with people that I was in undergraduate school. So I want to hear a little bit about that from you. And then part 2 of that is that one of the other most important parts that I tell everybody is that when you're in school, you're going to be very busy doing a lot of different things. But one of the more important things is you're going to be playing in a ton of different ensembles of a lot of different varied musics. You're going to have, for drummers, we're going to, of course, have jazz band. We're going to have things like trombone choir, sometimes studio jazz orchestra. You'll have legit orchestra, opera, like you said, percussion ensemble, that kind of thing. And they all help. They might seem unrelated, but they certainly do help each other. So tell us a little bit about not only some of the ensembles that you played in there, and also recitals. There's recitals and everything. But then tell us about your classmates and some of the people that you got to know and that you worked with and still stay in touch with today.
Yeah, well, and that to me is one of the biggest things in school, and then when you get out of school is the networking thing. But it's also awesome because that's how I know you. is through
Right.
is through one of my friends from Indiana, Dave Freeman, who
Right.
I've known since 1994. So I've known him for a long time, and it's amazing that it's for me and you. I think most people, it's a super tight knit group of musicians, and you all stay in touch. And you spend those 4 years or part of those 4 years together, depending on what age bracket you're in or what class you're in. And everybody goes off and does all these amazing things, and it's so cool to see what everybody's doing, and you keep in touch with everybody. And that's one of the great things to me about Facebook is just being able to stay in touch with people. And for me, being on the road all the time, and then being able to hang out with people all the time, is a great way to get in touch with them. But you're right, recitals, tons of recitals. Playing in tons of recitals for all different styles of music. And everything, like we said earlier, no matter what you learn, you can parlay it into whatever style of music you want to play or whatever you are playing. But the knowing people thing is huge, and that to me is half of the game.
We're in a relationship business.
It is very much a big part of it is who you know, and when you're there. Like you said, you're with these like-minded people who you all want to be professional musicians, and it's awesome to be in that environment. The other thing, excuse me, before I forget, to people going to school is take advantage as a drummer of practicing when you're in school, because when you get out of school, it is not easy to practice drum set when you're in an apartment, and that's what I tell students of mine all the time. I teach at Musicians Institute in Hollywood, and I'm like, practice, because you have the facilities. Just go play all the time. Don't sleep. Practice, because it's easy now, and it might not seem like a big deal, but it will be a big deal.
Yeah. Well, that is the perfect segue to go from college to professional life. So you had a great experience at Indiana.
Yeah, it was one of the best decisions of my life. It was for everything. I met my wife there, which is a whole other side of everything, but everything, the relationship side I built there, the experience I gained learning all styles of music. It was amazing.
So there had to be a time when you were getting close to graduating that you had to think to yourself, A, I've either had enough school and I'm ready to start playing, or B, graduate school.
Right.
What did you think? What was going through your mind?
Well, my thought was, I'll probably end up going to graduate school, but I don't want to do it right now. I want to go out and play and see what happens. That was kind of where my head was at. And I love teaching. And to teach at a higher level, you need to have another degree. You always, forever. You can pretty much never stop. And you definitely never stop learning. And I thought, I'm going to pick a city and move there and see what happens. And Kenny's thing, he had always said, give it 7 to 10 years. That was always his advice.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, what does that mean? And he said, pick a city, move there, and don't leave. Because if you leave, you're starting over. He said, just pick a place and just sell yourself on it. Say, I'm going to stay here. And he said his thing was at the end of 7 to 10 years, if you're not where you want to be, or you don't see yourself possibly being where you want to be, then maybe think about moving to another city or doing something else, just for whatever circumstances arise. And I thought, okay, I'll pick a city. And at that time, 7 to 10 years, I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, that's a long time.
Right.
But you get in the game and you realize, at the end of my 7 to 10 years, I called him one day. I was like, you were right. I was like, you were right about that. So I didn't know where I wanted to go. And I finally decided, okay, it has to be New York or LA for me. It was going to be New York or LA. So I had two problems. One, I didn't know which one. And two, I didn't have any money to move there. And I was like, how am I going to pull this off? I didn't have a job. So cruise ships. So I had to talk to a bunch of people that had done cruise ship gigs at Indiana. And they talked about how it was a great way to save money. I was like, that sounds like a lot of fun. And they said it's a great way to play every day and sight read stuff a lot and play music every day, practice reading chops. So I did a cruise ship for about 9 months. saved all that money for those 9 months because you can get they pay for health insurance. I got car insurance canceled. You have no expenses. Literally the only expenses you have is deodorant and toothpaste. So I saved all that money, and then I was like, okay, I've got the money now. Where am I going to go? And I talked to people. I didn't know really a lot of people in either city, and you're going to probably laugh. And I know you have friends in the same boat, but I talked to some friends who had other friends in New York, and they said, well, you can't have a car if you live in New York. And I was like, well, then how do you move drums? And they said, well, most places have drums, but if they don't, what do you do? And they're like, well, you get on the subway and you have a system and you have a dolly and you take your drums in the subway or you take a cab. And immediately I was like, I'm out. No way. And that's just me. I was like, that sounded to me like the most miserable thing in the world, trying to take a drum set on a subway. Yeah. And I had only been to New York a couple of times. I'd been to LA a bunch of times when I was a kid for vacation, going to Disneyland. So I sort of felt a little bit more tied, and being from Denver is sort of a little more west than east. But the thing for me was that how to move drums scenario with no car. I was like, all right, I'm going to LA.
Hey, let me tell you, everybody's got a reason, right? That sounds as valid to me. That's great. So then 9 months on the cruise ship, we're off to LA. Yeah. Okay. So when you get there, all right, you've got to find a place to live. Yeah. And hopefully find a place, like you said earlier, find a place to practice. Yeah. Just kind of, this is real nuts and bolts stuff. This is real practical stuff. Nobody ever really asked Dave Weckl these kind of questions, although I would love to. I would love to ask. I would love to also, right? Right. So what do you do? How do you? Because for folks who've never been to LA, LA is an interesting place. It is absolutely enormous. When you think of LA proper, that's just the very, very beginning of it. It just goes and goes and goes and expands and expands and expands. And so much of LA just covers all of pretty much Southern California. And so there's so many choices. And for the most part, especially comparing it to Bloomington, Indiana, it's quite expensive. Yes. Right. So what was your thought process on where I'm going to live and what kind of housing I'm going to get involved in to where I can try to practice?
Right, and this is a huge thing. You're right. No one thinks about this. So I didn't know basically anyone in LA. Like I had a couple of mutual friends of friends that were there. One of my best friends in the world, Mike Depke, who's a killer drummer who went to Indiana and studied with Kenny, was in a band at the time called Hair of the Dog. And he was on the road, and they were based out of Los Angeles, and he was going to move to Los Angeles from Nashville. Mm-hmm. And so I talked to him, and I was like, when are you moving? And he told me, I said, you know what? I'm going to go when you go. Why don't we just go together? He was like, great. So May 1st, 1999, okay. I got in the car. Mm-hmm. I drove there from Denver. He drove there from Nashville, and we got there and stayed at the Holiday Inn. Got a room together, and then he had a bunch of work going on because he already had a band. He already had stuff happening. Right. I had nothing going on. So he was whisked away into tour life. I stayed in the hotel, and I found my own place to live, and I had no idea where to go. Now he had suggested the Valley, which is the San Fernando Valley, which is like the north side of Los Angeles, Studio City, Sherman Oaks, Burbank, Encino. There's a whole bunch of places in the Valley. Right. And he had heard that that's where a lot of the music stuff was happening. There's a lot of studios there. I talked to Kenny. Kenny said, yes, the Valley is a great place to go because there's a lot of studios there, and that's ultimately what you want to do. So Mike and I get a hotel room at the Holiday Inn in a Universal City. Mm-hmm. We stay there, and then he goes off and does the road, and I started looking for apartments, and I had to find one right away because it's not cheap to live in a hotel. Right. And I quickly figured out I had about enough money to live for about 3 months and not do anything. So I found a place in Sherman Oaks in the Valley, and moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Sherman Oaks, and ended up living there for 5.5 years.
Interesting.
And it was just sort of luck that I just picked a great area. And I found this apartment. Mike was on the road. I had no idea what to do. So the first day after I got that apartment, I went to Guitar Center in Sherman Oaks. I went up to the drum department. I said, "Hey, I just moved here. What should I do?" And I wish now I knew the guy that was working there. And he was like, "You what?"
Yeah.
I said, "No, I just got here. What do I do?" And he said, "Well, there's a club next door called Cafe Cordial. Simon Phillips is playing there tonight." And I lost my mind because I just moved there. I just moved to Los Angeles. Simon Phillips is one of my all-time favorite drummers. I was like, "Oh my God." I was thinking, it's probably $50 to get in. How much is it? Free.
Yeah.
No cover, no drink minimum. And I was like, Los Angeles? Yeah, here we go. Going to see Simon Phillips, day one.
Yeah.
Right out of the gate. So I went to see Simon Phillips that night, sat at the bar, and just started talking to 3 dudes at the bar. And I'm still to this day, 17 years later, great friends with those 3 guys I met the first day.
Amazing.
That I moved there just because the dude that works in the drum department at Guitar Center said, "Hey, go check out this gig."
So that is an amazing story, man. Okay, you got there and you knew less than no one, right? What was your mindset at that time as far as like the kind of gigs or any gig that that you want to play? At that time, were you really focused on, look, I want to find these kind of people to play with, or were you just like, I got to play anything, give me anything, I'll do it?
That was me.
Okay.
I need money.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care. I love playing all kinds of music. It doesn't matter. How do I find gigs?
Yeah.
So the first thing I did was, and this is funny, this doesn't really exist anymore, but I got the Yellow Pages.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's an online version. There's definitely a way to do this now. And I looked up anything to do with entertainment agencies, studios, anything. Went down the list and called everyone in the Yellow Pages.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody. And, probably 80% of them were like, "Sorry, kid, good luck, And the other 20%, they were like, "All right, send us a tape." It was all cassette tapes. They're like, "Send us a tape." So I sent out a bunch of tapes to that, whatever, 20% of those people. Of those, like 5 called back. Of those, 1 I got my first gig from.
Cool. Jim
Johnson. I still play with him. I have a gig with him in like 3 weeks after I get back to Los Angeles, 17 years later. And then it was just trying to get your foot in the door and convince someone that you're worth taking a shot at.
Yeah.
And he was awesome. He said, "Hey, I've got a wedding band. I've got a gig in this wedding in San Clemente."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "I like your tape. I like talking to you. I want to give you a shot. But I want to meet you first."
That's interesting.
And I said, "No problem." I said, "Where do you want to meet?" He said, "I want to come to your apartment. I want to look at your CD collection."
Hold on. Wait, man,
it was awesome.
Please tell me red flags were popping up everywhere, man. When he said that,
It was, and I understood it because I asked him. I was like, "You want to what?" And he said, "I want to meet you." And I was like, I can't have somebody come on this gig and mess this gig up. This is like a high dollar gig.
Okay.
That's, people put a lot of money into weddings, it's a once in a lifetime thing for these people. And then he tells me the sax player on the gig is Albert Wing, who was in the Frank Zappa 88 band. And then I lost it. I was like, "You're what?" Like, my first gig in LA could be with Albert Wing. I was like, "You got to be kidding me." And he was like, "I just want to make sure." He's like, I like your stuff. I want to just see what you listen to. And he kind of wanted, and it made sense later. He wanted to make sure I wasn't kind of BSing my way through the whole process.
Yeah.
So he came over, nicest guy in the world, hung out my apartment, looks at all my CDs, sees everything from, Rush and Iron Maiden to Frank Zappa to Wayne Shorter and Tchaikovsky and all this stuff. And he was like, "All right, I'm going to give you a shot. I want you to do this gig."
First tune of the night's going to be Flight of Icarus. Then we're going to do Red Barchetta. Then we're going to do stuff from the Speak No Evil album.
Then the Black Page. Yeah.
Interesting, man.
So that was my first gig, my first like real paid gig, and I have to tell you, so knowing that Albert Wing was on the gig, I took everything I had, all because I'm a diehard Zappa fan, that had Albert Wing on it, to the gig to have him sign. I waited after we played 2 sets, and then in that set break, then I went up to him. I was like, okay, I'm going to turn into fanboy for a second. I've only been in LA for a couple of months. And oh my God, I can't believe you played with Frank Zappa. Can you sign all this stuff for me? And he was the nicest guy in the world and signed all this stuff. And
yeah,
it was pretty hilarious.
Cool story, man. Very cool story. So now again, here's another rubber meets the road question here. All right, where did you practice and where did you store your gear?
Yes. Okay. So I had a small 1-bedroom apartment. All my gear was in my apartment. I basically had no furniture. I had a recliner and a bed, and it was just, and I had 1 drum kit. It was stacked up in cases. You know, at that point in time, I mean, as you know, as you get older, you start collecting gear. I didn't have a place for it, I didn't have money for it, so I had all my gear in my apartment on the 2nd floor of a 2-story building with no elevator.
A walk up. Yeah, that's tough.
Man, now I look back at that and I'm like, yeah, man. So my advice is live on the ground floor or make sure there's an elevator. We'll start with that for things you don't really think of right out of the gate. As far as practicing goes, there are lockouts, and I didn't know what that term meant at the time. So places you can get that you rent monthly and you have 24/7 access to go practice. Now these rooms are expensive. There's no way I had enough money for that. And I didn't know anybody to share one with. My friend Mike was on the road. Right. So there were hourly places. There's a place called AMP. There was a place called Sound Arena. And I bet there's places in most major cities. There were hourly rental places. There was like $12 an hour. And I don't know, I'm assuming now it's probably more than that. It's probably 15 or who knows, right. Or maybe it's the same. I don't know. So it makes you think a lot differently about practicing when you're blowing a lot of money on it versus when you're in school and you don't really think about it. You know, it's not free. You're paying for school, but it's accessible and you don't really see it that way to then, I want to go practice for 3 hours. Oh, and it's going to cost me $36. And you don't have a job and you don't have any gigs, and all of a sudden it's a huge deal, and you learn to maximize time really fast.
I like to tell my students, make sure you are practicing the things that need to be practiced.
Yes.
You know, not just mindlessly jamming. Yeah, that's
definitely. Yeah.
And there's no truer sense to that than having to pay hourly to get that practice in.
Yeah. So that was a big wake up call. And I remember day one of practicing in an hourly room thinking, oh, wow, I think maybe I squandered some time in the past when I could have been practicing more. I mean, you can always be practicing more, but that is a huge wake up call when you have to pay for it. Fast forward now. So I did the hourly rental thing for probably 5 years. And then you start making enough money to where you could get a lockout. So then I was in a band, they had a lockout, and I split the cost with a band. And then for the last 10 years or so, I've shared it with a really good friend of mine, Kevin Stevens, who's an amazing drummer in LA. And we've had a room for about 10 years that's a 24/7 place. And we store all of our kits there. Between us, we have, like 15 drum sets and 50 snare drums.
Nice.
It's all changed, and we use each other's gear all the time. So now it's a lockout situation.
Very cool, man. So now you got to LA in 99, and then you had the mindset of like, I'm going to work. When that phone rings, I'm going to start doing some work. Yeah. Somewhere down the line, because you've already alluded to it, you were like, now I teach at MIT. How did you get to the point? Did you teach privately at any other places prior to that, and then kind of get us to how you ended up getting a gig teaching at MIT?
Yeah, so one of the first things I did in that whole Yellow Pages experiment, I also was going online, which was funny to say, like kind of the early days of being online. But it was, and I found this thing called the Traveling Music Teacher Network. And I called them, sent in my stuff, and I started teaching through them. They would hook you up with going to people's houses to teach. So that's how I got into teaching. And then friends of those kids would want drum lessons. So I started teaching friends of the kids I met from the Traveling Music Teacher Network. And then you get the idea, okay, well then I'll go to elementary schools and middle schools and put up flyers. I'll go to Guitar Center and Sam Ash and put up flyers. And I started teaching privately all the time. And then eventually, it kind of works its way up to hey, maybe I'm ready to teach, at some place, that offers like a degree, like an associate's degree, such as an MI or, whatever it is in whatever town you live in. And I went to, I went down there and met with them, and they said, yeah, there's a sub list, so you can be put on the substitute list. And then slowly they kind of work you in. So they get you kind of known to the students. And there's about 25 guys that teach drums at MI.
Yeah. So that was, for you, that was almost like a cold call, right? Then, you just kind of went to them and it's just like, hey, I want to do this.
I did, yeah. Yeah, there was, at the time, the head of the department was Tim Pedersen. And I just called him and went down there and then realized that there was another Indiana guy who was teaching there, actually. And then, and everybody, like you said earlier, everybody knows everybody at the end of the day. You figure this out pretty quickly. So then I knew some guys that were teaching there, and then I didn't really have time to do it. And so the whole MI thing kind of took a while until I started teaching there full time, and then started subbing. I started teaching there full time in 2011. So a long time later, but I was doing tons of private lessons. There was a place in Beverly Hills that I got hooked up with from a friend of a friend, and just one thing led to another. One student led to another, led to knowing another teacher, led to subbing for him, led to teaching at another gig. And the whole drumming community is just a huge fraternity, and everybody throws people gigs all the time, and it's not a competitive thing at all, which is awesome. It's like all my best friends at home are drummers. So
sure.
So everybody throws work to each other, and then that ultimately led to me teaching at MI.
So at MI, are you teaching private students, or are you teaching classes, or both?
Both. Now I've had to be on a leave of absence for the last while since I got this gig. But when I have time, I go back and I still sub. But I was there for a good 3 years or so without having to take a leave of absence, and all of that reading classes. I actually helped write one of the new reading class curriculums, which was a great experience. Reading rhythm section workshop classes. I taught the jazz class. Tons of private lessons. LPWs, which is a live playing workshop class where all styles of music and students learn on every instrument, learn a song, come in, don't know anybody in the room, and sit down and play, whatever song, Back in Black, whatever it is, with a bunch of musicians they've never met before. So I started teaching kind of everything, kind of right out of the gate. And there's numerous guys that teach all those classes too. It was not just me by any means. There's 25 guys that all kind of rotate through everything. So.
In a normal quarter that you might teach there, how many private students would you say that you instruct?
10. I kind of was around 10.
Level-wise, these students that you're teaching, do they have you teach a certain level, or are they students just all across the board, and you tailor the lessons to the level that they're at?
Yes. So I would kind of tailor to whatever level they're at, and for us, it was more. And I eventually got into the placement process. And for us, it was more about finding the right fit musically for someone. So, if someone comes in and says, I want to learn Rush songs, then I'm a good guy for that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
I want to learn Frank Zappa stuff. I'm a good guy for that. So you see, I want to do, speed metal, double bass stuff. I'm not the guy for that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's other guys that are there that are killer, Jeff Bowders and some other dudes that are great at that. So it's kind of finding the right person, and then then I do what I was taught, and immediately I'm like, you need to learn all styles of music.
Right.
We're going to focus on what you want to do, but you have to do this, all this other stuff. Do you want to work? Yes. Do you want to make a living? Yes. Is this what you want to do for the rest of your life? Yes. Then you need to learn how to play, a songo or whatever it is,
Does the school dictate your private lessons from the standpoint of like, look, now you have to teach out of this book, you have to teach out of this book, or do they give you leeway on that?
There's leeway. So the first thing is make sure everybody is good with the curriculum and their classes. Or so if I have a student in a jazz class, are you cool with the jazz class this week? Yes. Let me hear it. Let me check it for 2 minutes. Okay, you're cool. We'll go on to the next class. Are you cool with this class? Yeah. Once that's done, you want to learn how to play sinister footwear? Sure, let's talk about it. Yeah. So then it's kind of open to whatever anybody wants to do after that point.
Nice, man. Now, having taught there for you're going on your 6th year, coming up on your 6th year, 6th year of teaching there. From a professional playing standpoint, has that teaching gig led to any other gig, like playing gigs for yourself?
Well, yeah, because it's all about networking.
Sure.
And so there's a whole bunch of, there's 25 drum teachers, there's probably 50 guitar teachers, probably 25 bass teachers, and you end up playing with them in various contexts, and then you end up playing with them outside of school, and then you become friends with them, and then you play gigs with them. So definitely. So one of my things that I've learned in, not just teaching MI, but especially when you move somewhere and there's not a lot going on, I didn't turn down anything. I accepted every gig, even if it didn't pay, just because it was a great way to meet people. When I first moved there and I didn't know anyone basically in Los Angeles to play with, even if a gig paid nothing, it would pay. It would pay in me getting to know these 4 guys in the band, and developing these friendships and becoming great friends with these people, and then maybe that band breaks up and then you stick with the guitar player for a while, and the old bass player gets in a wedding band, and then he needs a drummer and he calls you, and this stuff spreads like wildfire.
Certainly. And
I quickly kind of saw where that would go, where the whole quote networking thing would go. But to your question on the MI thing, definitely, because you end up playing with all these people at the school, students and mainly the teachers, but also students get out of there and are phenomenal players and need a drummer, and they know you and they're comfortable with you because you've played in their guitar class or whatever. And
all right, folks, that does it for part 1 of the interview. Thanks so much for tuning in. Next week, we're going to get into a little bit more about LA and then a whole lot more about the Zappa gig. If you've ever wanted to know the inner workings and the nuts and bolts of what it takes to work for a Zappa, tune in next week to get the inside scoop. As always, thanks for listening, and we value your opinion and your thoughts and ideas, so please reach out to us. Let us know how you feel. You can catch us at our email address, which is drummersweeklygroovecast@gmail.com. If you're a person who likes to talk in 140 characters or less, you can tweet us at twitter.com/DWGroovecast, or as the kids like to say, at DWGroovecast. And you can Facebook us as well, facebook.com/drummersweeklygroovecast. All right, until next week, part 2 of the Ryan Brown interview. We will see you then. Bye-bye.
$50 paid your rent, and freaks were in a circus tent. Ha! Those were the days.